Mr. Blumenauer of Oregon. Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, those who are watching this today may wonder what just happened in the House of Representatives, and I want to talk a little bit about it so they understand what goes on next week on the floor of this House. Today we set the stage for the passage of the Republican health care plan. It won't be a repeal of what the Democratic Congress did before. It will be returning us to the status quo when we are totally in control. The health care insurance in this country is totally in control of the private insurance industry. Now, yesterday I was on a conference call with groups that represent 18,000 physicians who want us not to act and repeal the Affordable Health Care Act next week. They've taken resolutions in every district around this country among physicians. They've delivered them to the Speaker's office, Mr. Boehner in Cincinnati. They've taken them to Mr. Cantor's office in Virginia because doctors know what this act really does. I listened to a couple of my colleagues who are physicians, and I heard them say they wanted to repeal it all. But the 18,000 physicians who I was talking to, or their representatives, on the phone yesterday were talking about what the real experience is out in the doctor's offices, not on the floor of the House, or not in some political arena where we're making points, but when you're actually dealing with patients. And the reason the doctors want it, I am a physician. I've been there. I've done it also. I've had phone calls from Omaha, Nebraska about whether I could continue to see a patient. And every doctor who has practiced in this country in the last 30 years knows that's what goes on. They know that patients don't have health insurance because they have a pre-existing condition. They know that people who thought they had insurance suddenly get an illness and then find out their insurance company won't cover them because of some technicality or whatever they find. They worry about their own children who finish college at age 21 or 22 and can no longer be covered on their insurance policy. But with the bill that we passed last year, those young people can be covered from age 22 to 26 until they get a job where they have health care benefits. Those are the reasons why doctors want to see this bill stay in place and be enacted. Now, what we're going to see out here next week is political theater. I call it the sheep in wolf's clothing, or the wolf in sheep's clothing Follies Act of 2011. We have a piece of legislation which we were told about today. It is exactly 1 page long and repeals everything that happened. It repeals the prohibition against pre-existing condition exclusions. It allows people no longer to cover children over the age of 22. It sets lifetime limits again on people's insurance policies. All of that occurs here in one single piece of paper with no debate, no committee hearings, no effort to find out what's going on out there in the community. It's a political document for a political purpose for a part of the Republican Party. It is not what the American people are actually feeling. Now, what you will hear next week is even more interesting, because we're going to get a fraudulent piece of legislative hot air. They'll say, well, yes, we're repealing Obamacare. You know, it's strange. They never call Medicare Johnson Medicare. It passed under President Johnson. I wonder why not. Because it was for all Americans. It's not the president. It's the body that sits here that passes the legislation that covers all Americans. And yet, we are now next week going to be offered this piece of fraudulent hot air. It's House Resolution 9. They'll say, yes, we're repealing that, but we have this. And when you read H.R. 9, it's one page of nothing.
Time has expired.
Read it. You got the weekend. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas is recognized. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Much of my district comprises forests managed by the U.S. Forest Service. Over the last 2 years, I have received a growing volume of complaints protesting the increasingly exclusionary and elitist policies of this agency. These complaints charge the Forest Service, among other things, with imposing inflated fees that are forcing the abandonment of family cabins held for generations, charging exorbitant new fees that are closing down long-established community events upon which many small and struggling mountain towns depend for tourism, expelling long-standing grazing operations on specious grounds, causing damage both to the local economy and to the federal government's revenues, and obstructing the sound management of our forests through a policy that can only be described as benign neglect, creating both severe fire dangers and massive unemployment. Practiced in the marketplace, we would renounce these tactics as predatory and abusive. In the public sector, they are intolerable. Combined, these actions evince an ideologically driven hostility to the public's enjoyment of the public's land, and a clear intention to deny the public the responsible and sustainable use of that land. Most recently, the Forest Service has placed severe restrictions on vehicle access to the Plumas National Forest, despite volumes of public protests. Supervisor Bill Connolly, chairman of the Butte County Board of Supervisors, writes that, quote, the restriction applies to such activities as collecting firewood, retrieving game, loading or unloading horses or other livestock, and camping. He goes on to write, quote, the national forests are part of the local fabric. The roads within the national forests are used by thousands of residents and visitors for transportation and recreation. These activities generate revenue for our rural communities, which are critical for their survival, end quote. Mr. Speaker, this is not a small matter. The Forest Service now controls 193 million acres within our nation, a land area equivalent to the size of Texas. During the despotic eras of Norman and Plantagenet England, the Crown declared 1/3 of the land area of southern England to be the Royal Forest, the exclusive preserve of the monarch, his forestry officials, and favorite aristocrats. The people of Britain were forbidden access to and enjoyment of these forests under harsh penalties. This exclusionary system became so despised by the British people that in 1215, no less than 5 clauses of the Magna Carta were devoted to redress of grievances that are hauntingly similar to those that are now flooding my office. Mr. Speaker, the attitude that now permeates the U.S. Forest Service from top to bottom is becoming far more reminiscent of the management of the royal forests during the autocracy of King John than of an agency that is supposed to encourage, welcome, facilitate, and maximize the public's use of the public's land in a nation of free men and free women. After all, that was the vision of the Forest Service set forth by its legendary founder, Gifford Pinchot, in 1905, quote, to provide the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people in the long run, end quote. In May of 2009 and April of 2010, some of my California colleagues and I sent letters to the Forest Service expressing these concerns. I've also personally met with senior officials of that agency on several occasions in which I have referenced more than 500 specific complaints of Forest Service abuses received by my office. All that I have received to date from these officials are smarmy assurances that they will address these concerns, assurances that their own actions have belied at every turn. Mr. Speaker, it is time for Congress to conduct a top-to-bottom review of the abuses by this increasingly unaccountable and elitist agency, to demand accountability for the damage it has done and is doing to our forests' health, to the public's trust, to the government's revenues, and to the nation's economy, and to take whatever actions are necessary to restore an attitude of consumer-friendly public service, which was Gifford Pinchot's original vision, and for which the U.S. Forest Service was once renowned and respected. I yield back.
Mr. Green of Texas.
May I speak for 5 minutes, revise and extend my remarks?
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I was there when the President of the United States of America signed into law the Health Care Act that is sought to be repealed. I was within 20 feet or so of the President, and at the time he signed it, there was a feeling of great jubilation, but also there was a feeling of great consternation. Because as he signed it in ink, I knew that it was written in tears, written in the tears of the many parents who saw their children with pre-existing conditions and could not get insurance for the illness that their children had. Signed in ink, written in tears, but it was also written in sweat. The sweat of the many persons who toiled for more than 50 years to get health care for all Americans. Signed in ink, written in sweat, tears, and in blood. Written in the blood of the millions of people who suffered because they couldn't get health care, and of also the many who died because they could not get the insurance that would afford them health care. I was there. I knew what the circumstances were. At the time the bill was signed, we were spending $2.5 trillion per year on health care. $2.5 trillion is $79,000 a second on health care. That was approximately 17.6% of our GDP. And by 2018, it would have become $4.4 trillion per year, which would have been more than 20% of GDP and $139,000 a second. Signed in ink, written in blood, sweat, and tears. I knew where we were at the time it was signed. In my state, we had 6 million uninsured, 1.1 million in Harris County, and 20% of the children in the state of Texas uninsured when that bill was signed. Still, in America, we have millions that are not getting the proper attention that they need, but there is the potential to get it because of this bill. At the time it was signed, we had more than 40 million people uninsured. The bill covered some 30-plus million people. We had 21 million people who were working full-time and did not have insurance. 45,000 people per year were dying because they didn't have insurance. That's one person every 12 minutes. 21 million people were working full-time, did not have insurance. That bill brought people under the umbrella of health care and health insurance. The greatness of America is not going to be measured by how many great buildings we build and how many people we can cut out of health care. It's not going to be measured by the people that we can put in the suites of life. The greatness of America will be measured by how we treat people in the streets of life. This bill addresses people in the streets of life, real people who can die because they don't get the health care that the richest country in the world can provide. I respect those who vote however they choose. But as for me, I'm going to stand with those people who need health care and who are going to get it under this bill, because pre-existing conditions no longer exist. And for edification purposes, for those who do not know, pregnancy was a pre-existing condition at the time the bill was signed. For those who do not know, children under the age of 26, many of them required to get health care because they couldn't stay on their parents' policies, they can now stay with their parents. The donut hole for seniors being closed with this bill, the donut hole for edification purposes, is that point in time when a senior has to pay for all of the pharmaceuticals that a senior might receive and need. And these pharmaceuticals are expensive. This bill addresses these things. This bill is a lifeline for many persons in this country. I will support it, and I will say more about it in the future. I stand with the American people who need health care. I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Mr. Burton of Indiana. For what purposes Mr. Pence rise?
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask unanimous consent to claim Mr. Burton's time and address the House for 5 minutes, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The largest abortion provider in America should not also be the largest recipient of federal funding under Title X. Today, with the support of more than 120 of my colleagues, I introduced the Title X Abortion Provider Prohibition Act. I'm grateful for the support of my colleagues within this House and the support of millions of Americans who long to see this Congress take this decisive action on behalf of our values. The Title X Abortion Provider Prohibition Act would deny any family planning funds under Title X from going to Planned Parenthood or other organizations that perform abortions. It would ensure that abortion providers are not subsidized with federal tax dollars. Now let me say, to be very clear, Mr. Speaker, this legislation does not cut one penny from Title X family planning funding. I applaud much of the important work that's done at Title X clinics across this country: breast cancer screening, HIV protection, education, counseling, pregnancy diagnosis. This legislation simply prevents family planning funding from aiding organizations that profit from the abortion industry. Federal funding should reflect the priorities and the values of a majority of the American people. Whatever people think about abortion across this country, since Roe versus Wade, survey after survey have shown that an overwhelming majority of Americans oppose the use of taxpayer dollars to support, subsidize, or promote abortion at home or abroad. It's for that reason that I would assume that most Americans would be surprised, if not shocked, to learn that the largest abortion provider in America is also the largest recipient of federal funding under Title X. But that is most certainly the case. According to their own annual report, Planned Parenthood received more than $363 million in government funding in 2009 alone. During that time, they performed an unprecedented 324,008 abortions, a heartbreaking statistic. Planned Parenthood of America continues to receive a greater amount of federal funding each year while simultaneously taking over an increasing share of the devastating abortion market in this country. Now, look, Planned Parenthood and its defenders will claim that the money they've received from the government has not been used to fund abortions, but that is only technically true. Current law prohibits the use of Title X family planning funds, quote, in programs where abortion is a method of family planning, close quote. Therein lies the loophole. While Title X money cannot directly be used to fund abortions, common sense says there's no question that taxpayer dollars received by Planned Parenthood are used to cover allowed expenses like overhead operational costs, thus freeing up other money for the clinics that do provide abortion. And in many of our largest cities, Title X clinics are literally, run by Planned Parenthood, are literally just steps away from abortion clinics operated by Planned Parenthood, many times in the same building. This legislation would close that loophole that's forced millions of pro-life Americans to subsidize the nation's leading abortion provider, sustaining and underwriting this nefarious trade. I urge my colleagues to support the Title X Abortion Provider Prohibition Act. I urge our new majority to bring this legislation forward with all deliberate speed. Let me say again, the largest abortion provider in America should not also be the largest recipient of federal funding under Title X. For the sake of American taxpayers, for the sake of the important work being done at Title X clinics across this country, and most importantly, for the sake of the defenseless unborn and vulnerable young women who find themselves in a crisis pregnancy, we must enact the Title X Abortion Provider Prohibition Act and end the day of taxpayer support for these organizations. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Woolsey of California.
Thank you.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, campaign fundraising and spending is way out of control. We need a constitutional amendment to fix it. The American people have to help this Congress because it will not do it by itself. Many years ago, Will Rogers, whose statue sits just outside the doors to this chamber, joked, "We have the best Congress money can buy." And unfortunately, that joke has not grown old. After witnessing this past election cycle, the campaign money expended to elect this Congress, both chambers, is way out of bounds. The Center for Responsive Politics estimates that a record-breaking $4 billion, that's with a B, dollars, was spent in the 2010 midterm elections. Now, $4 billion equals 4,000 millions. So 4,000 millions was spent to elect the current sitting Congress. The number of members being elected didn't change. The amount of money being raised changed. It skyrocketed. The opportunity for people of ordinary means with great talent to gain election to office in our country is disappearing, election after election. It's very hard for talented people of ordinary means to raise 4,000 millions. To put that number in perspective, 4 billion or 4,000 millions divides up to about $8.5 million spent on each of the 435 seats in this chamber and those who are up for election in the other. $8,500,000 having to be raised every 2 years. Yes, an average of $8.5 million per member was expended in each of the races. That is 50 times more than the amount of money the job pays. We would be better off to say to the American people, we're going to get rid of all of this campaign donation stuff and just beg our salaries from the public. It would be a lot cheaper, and we wouldn't have to spend it on all those ridiculous ads. Imagine the outrageous amount of fundraising that sits on the head of every single member in this chamber. This past congressional election, in fact, was more expensive than even the last presidential cycle, in which $2 billion was spent, and they said that that was the most expensive race in U.S. history, and Wall Street financiers were the major contributor in that presidential race. How is it that as our country is fighting to recover from near economic collapse, and the average American is struggling to make ends meet, with national unemployment still at 9.4%, Somehow, billions and billions of dollars were able to be thrown by big interests to affect the election. It is because, unlike the average American, big financial players, big business, multinational corporations, all kinds of well-funded ideological groups have deep pockets, and they do try to buy access and influence what happens. And this situation makes it much more difficult for ordinary Americans to have their voices heard here. The American people know this. They're frustrated. These big interests should not outweigh the American people's voice nor vote. The American people should have the primary access and influence here, not deep-pocketed interests. Truly, the American campaign finance system is out of control. We all know it, and we all know it needs to be fixed. And that ought to be a priority of this new Congress. Real campaign finance reform thus far has been unattainable because neither party wants to stop the money chase, because they both think that next time out, they might be the ones to really grab all those gold rings. And too much of that money is playing insider politics, and that is why the American people feel that they are being forced to the sidelines rather than the front lines in our elections. They feel like they're pushing a big boulder up the hill, and every time they cast their vote, that somehow that boulder comes right back down on them. Reform is being thwarted again and again by outside interest groups and deep-pocket interests. The Congress is unwilling and seemingly unable to act on its own, along with Supreme Court rulings like Citizens United versus the FEC and Buckley versus Vallejo. Mr. Speaker, I've introduced H.R. 8, a new constitutional amendment that I put in every session to bring the system under control. There could be no more important priority to our country than giving our politics back to the American people again. I thank you very much. I yield back my remaining time.
Mr. Jones of North Carolina. Yes. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, history, heritage, and symbols of the United States are constantly under criticism in this country. Even yesterday, when we read the Constitution of the United States on the House floor, the first time it's ever been done in 200 years, there were some who complained that it was irrelevant. It's kind of like folks in church that cover their ears when certain sections of the Bible are read. They don't want to hear it because it may apply to them. People go to courts nowadays to try to remove our national motto, "In God We Trust." It's above the flag, Mr. Speaker, although television very seldom shows our national motto. And then there are those who are offended by the American flag, "Oh Glory." It's not even displayed in parts of the United States because it offends some people that are included in the group of foreigners who are offended by the American flag. And now we get to today. A report by the Houston Chronicle about Marine Michael Marola, a 60-year-old vet from the United States Marine Corps. And he flies, there he is, he still looks like a Marine. This is a photograph from the Chronicle that shows Old Glory and, of course, the Marine flag flying in his backyard on a 20-foot flagpole. No one's complained. His neighbors like it. Kids walk by and actually compliment him on flying Old Glory in the Marine flag. But the neighborhood association has complained and sued. Now, who is this guy? Well, he served the United States Marines from 1969 to 1977. He trained with the United States Navy SEALs. After he left the Marine Corps, he was responsible as Sergeant of the Guard for raising the flag at NSA right down the road. He's from New York, but he got to Texas as fast as he could, and he has no intention of taking down this flag or flagpole. He's a passionate American. He's a Marine. But the association doesn't like it. And here's what they have said in their lawsuit. The flagpole is a detriment to the association and causes imminent harm and irreparable injury to the association. The problem with the flagpole of that height and that significance is it flaps in the wind and causes noise to other homeowners. That's their problem. So they sued him. Now, first of all, we have an issue of freedom of speech. Supreme Court has said it's a right to fly the flag. Speech includes the flying of the American flag. It is the symbol of everything that is good and right about America. That's why it's behind you, Mr. Speaker, when we go into session every day. Marines and sailors and soldiers and members of the Coast Guard have fought under that flag all over the world and have died for that flag so the association can exist down there in northwest Houston. And right now we're engaged in two wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and members of our military are fighting under that flag. But its flying in the breeze offends the association because the flapping causes irreparable injury. Well, flapping in the breeze has brought safety to the United States. The flag flying throughout the world and the noise, if we can use that word, the sound of freedom is the sound of that flag flying in the United States and throughout the world. It's freedom of speech, and it trumps the elitist concept that the flag and the flagpole are offensive to the association. You know, Mr. Marola is a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. And we're proud of our Marines in the United States. They're a unique bunch. It was best said by an Army general about the Marines. There are only two groups that understand the Marines and the enemy. And that is correct. So good for you, Mike Marola. Keep your flagpole up. Fly Old Glory. Fly the Marine flag. We are proud of you to keep fighting for the flag, because freedom of flying the flag trumps the concept that it's offensive to some people. God bless our Marines. God bless you, Mike Marola, and Semper Fi. And that's just the way it is. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Mr. DeFazio of Oregon. Mr. Franks of Arizona. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much appreciate the privilege to address you here on the floor of the House in this leadership hour designated by the Majority Leader. And there are a number of subjects I wanted to take up this afternoon, but I'm first inspired by the statement made by the gentleman from Texas, Judge Congressman Mr. Poe, about Marine Mike Marola. And this is one of these recurring stories that we hear across the country. Somebody that's an ACLU individual, somebody that thinks somehow they get indignant because there's something somewhere that would allow them to vent some of their prepackaged hyperventilation against patriotism or the truth or life or the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence or American values or the values of Western civilization or Judeo-Christianity. All those people out there are full of indignancies. And so an American flag and a Marine flag offends somebody, I say tough. I'm glad you're there. Fly that flag. Fly it proud and fly it long. And I especially appreciate the statement made by Mr. Poe about the sound of that flag. My flag's on a flagpole about that same height, 20 foot. And I step out my door in the morning, I check the wind and the weather, and I look at that flag and I listen to that sound. And there's times I'm sitting there in the dark at night on my deck, and I'm hearing that flag from the light that shines on it around the corner just a little bit, and I hear that ripple of Old Glory. It gives me comfort, and it gives me pride, and it reminds me of the privilege of serving here, anywhere you can serve Americans, anywhere on this globe. And I think of a time also on March 18th of 2003, where I went out here to Pershing Park, this side of the of the White House, when there was a anti-war demonstration that took place. I actually walked around through the mall around the Washington Monument as they prepared their demonstration. I remember Chairman and former Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, John Conyers, standing on a little stage there with great big speakers calling for the impeachment of President Bush because it looked like there was an impending liberation of Iraq. And I saw a man there. Every kind of discontented, countercultural, anti-American group was represented in those thousands of people that came here that day. I saw the Japanese Communist flag. I saw Vegetarians for Peace. I saw every counterculturalist group you can imagine. And I saw a man there, an aging hippie. He had on a jacket. He was a photographer, you could tell. And he was taking pictures with great pride of this anti-Americanism. And he reached in his pocket of his jacket, a worn leather jacket, and pulled out of his pocket a flag, an American flag, a silk American flag, a small flag, and he used it to wipe the lens of his camera. That's an image I'll never forget. But no one stepped up to say he couldn't do that. Where were they then? Where were the critics of Mr. Marola then, when flags are used as grease rags to scrub the lens of a camera that's taking pictures of anti-Americans joined together to protest the saving of our freedom the Marine Marola has stepped up to defend? Those actions against him are offensive to me, and I say guard the flag, defend the flag, and I'll stand with you. And I know Judge Poole will too. Thanks for bringing this up. I appreciate it, Judge. I came here to talk about a number of things tonight, and one of them is the repeal of Obamacare. You know, freedom-loving Americans fought this for a long time. It began to roll out at us in the summer of, got to roll my years back now, in the summer of 2008, when President Obama was elected. I should actually take you back through a little bit of this history, Mr. Speaker, because there's some of these components that the American people forget about. There was a relatively unknown state senator from Illinois named Barack Obama, and he gave a speech before a national convention of the Democrat Party, and that elevated him into some level of national prominence. There were those that decided they wanted to move him forward to become President of the United States. Hillary Clinton also decided that she wanted to be President of the United States, and these two found themselves in, actually after John Edwards anyway, locking horns, the two of them, for the nomination of the presidency of the United States under the Democrat Party. I know a little about this. Barack Obama's movement began in Iowa. He brought his people over from Chicago, and they started a movement, and they did battle with Hillary Clinton in Iowa. John Edwards was there, of course, and that went on for 4 years. But we have to remember that here in 1993 and 4, when Bill Clinton was elected president, remember he said, you get a twofer. You get Hillary and you get Bill. Well, I wasn't all that happy getting Bill, let alone Hillary. But he assigned Hillary the job of writing a National Health Care Act. And this was a complete takeover of our health care in the United States, socialized medicine in an even purer form than Obamacare is today. And we watched as this unfolded, and she set up meetings, closed-door meetings, and they cooked up this bill. And I recall the flow chart of the Hillary Care bill. Now, I had a laminated copy of it in my office, my construction office in Odebolt, Iowa. And it gives me chills to think yet about the expansion of government that emerged from the Hillary Care proposal. But we need to remember, Mr. Speaker, the relevant component of that is, yes, a government takeover of health care that had been advanced and advocated in this country for quite a few years. But America's rejection of Hillary Care was resounding. And if Bill Clinton were going to maintain his capital as a president, they had to pull that bill down. The American people were against Hillary Care. I was against it. It actually animated me into getting engaged in politics. And I do not think I would be here today if it weren't for Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton deciding they were going to step in and take our liberty. But in any case, Hillary Clinton's credentials, now Secretary of State, and with all respect, and I mean that honestly, her credentials on health care were greater than those of Barack Obama. He had to build himself foreign policy credentials, and he had to build himself health care credentials. And so they turned the presidential nomination debate into a health care debate, a health insurance debate. And as they battled their ideas out, they had to find ways that they could separate themselves from each other and still remain Democrats. And so we heard all kinds of statements out of Barack Obama as he competed for credibility on the policy of health care. And in the process of doing that, they convinced the American people that we were in a health care crisis in America. They intentionally and willfully, and I'm talking about Democrats in general, conflated two terms. And it ended up duping the American people. They conflated the term health care and the term health insurance, to the point now where when we hear someone say health care, we don't know whether they're saying health insurance or whether it's actually taking care of someone's health. I recall that then the newly elected governor of Iowa, Chet Culver, now just voted out of office, came out here to the Capitol to sit down with the congressional delegation meeting, the Iowa congressional delegation. We sat in a conference room over in the Senate, and he said, there are 40,000 kids in Iowa that don't have health care. We've got to get them health care. And I looked at him and I said, Governor, I don't think that's true. I don't think there are any kids in Iowa that don't have health care. Could you give me an example of a child in Iowa that doesn't have health care? Well, no, he couldn't do that. Neither could he actually even tell me that he really meant health insurance. I had to feed that line to him so he could understand the difference. It was so embedded in his head that health care and health insurance, the conflated terms, could be used interchangeably. Mr. Speaker, if people are having trouble understanding this, I'd use another example of conflated terms. The difference between immigrant and illegal immigrant. I mean, I was asked earlier today, what do I have to say about people that accuse me of being anti-immigrant? I said, that's offensive. There isn't anybody in this entire Congress that's anti-immigrant. And the reporter stopped, like, well, what kind of a statement is that? Surely there are. I said, no, there isn't anybody in this entire United States Congress that's anti-legal immigrant. Everybody I know in here, and there's a new class I don't know that well, but I suspect they'd fit the same mold. Everybody I know in here is supportive of legal immigrants. We cheer them. We're proud of them. When they take the oath of naturalization, I often go and give a little speech and welcome them to being citizens of the United States of America. It is a proud time. I present them constitutions and I sign. I want them to revere it the way I do, the way many of us do. But they conflated the term immigrant with illegal immigrant, and then they have the audacity to accuse people of being anti-immigrant when everybody I know is pro-immigrant, pro-legal immigrant, and everybody in here ought to be anti-illegal immigrant. But that's how they use the language to distort the argument and get people confused on where they stand on the issue. So they did that with health care and health insurance. And then Barack Obama was establishing his credentials on health care. They began to convince the American people that we had 47 million people in this country that are uninsured. Well, it actually may be true, may have been true. And you can start down through that list of 47 million and start to subtract from that the numbers that are here illegally. That's at least 12 million, 12.1 million. I believe it's more than 20, but I'll take the 12 million. And I have to guess at the totals here because it's been a little while since I've run through these. But generally speaking, you take 47 million that are listed as uninsured by the Democrats, and you subtract from that those that are here illegally, those that qualify for Medicaid but don't bother to sign up, those that make over $75,000 a year and presumably could provide their own health insurance, those that qualify under their employer but have turned down that opportunity for that health insurance, and when you get done subtracting those that do have options, including affordable options, and you narrow the 47 million down to those who do not have their own health insurance policy and do not have affordable options, that's 12 million. That's actually the 12.1 million number I reached to remember. That's less than 4% of the United States population without their own health insurance policy and without an affordable option. Less than 4%. What percent of the health care industry did they want to take over in order to address that less than 4%, those 12.1 million? 100%. Barack Obama proposed to take over 100% of our health care industry in America in order to get at those less than 4% that are uninsured without an affordable option. And he told us, remember these things? We're in an economic crisis. We're in an economic crisis, and we can't fix this economic crisis, Barack Obama, unless we first fix health care. And how do we do that? Well, the argument against it by him, and Hillary Clinton as well, we spend too much money on health care. What's their solution? Spend a lot more. Throw $1 trillion at health care. And he also argued that if you like your policy, you can keep it. If you like your doctor, you can keep him. And when he said it, he knew. He knew that that commitment could not be kept. You can't keep your health insurance policy if the policy doesn't exist any longer. You can't keep your health insurance policy if the company doesn't exist any longer. The President said we needed to have more competition in the health insurance industry. The demagoguery has been going on here for the last couple of days about not turning over this country to the health insurance companies again who get accused of being vipers. Well, they're in a free market system. They need to be able to compete against each other. The President wants to have, and was not successful in this component, wants to have a federal health insurance policy program to compete against the health insurance company. He argued there needed to be more competition in the health insurance industry. And so, what does he do? He wants to have the federal government do that. Does the President even know how many health insurance companies we have or had at the passage of Obamacare? Probably not. He's probably not watching C-SPAN right now, Mr. Speaker, but if any of his staff out there, I can tell you what that number was. 1,300 health insurance companies in America. 1,300 companies competing against each other, not all of them against each other, not one competing against all the other 1,299, because there's a McCarran-Ferguson Act that allows the states to protect the insurance companies within their states and set up monopolies or quasi-monopolies within the states. I think we should repeal that. If we repeal that, we'll allow then people to buy insurance across state lines, and we would instantly put those 1,300 health insurance companies in competition with each other. That would achieve a goal to lower the costs and increase the options and provide for people to have more choices themselves, and it would help sustain the doctor-patient relationship at the same time. And, Mr. Speaker, 1,300 health insurance companies, how many policy varieties existed a year ago? 100,000 health insurance policy varieties existed a year ago. That's not enough competition. 1,300 companies, 100,000 policies. The President wanted a new federal company to compete against them. Now, that's because he understands this pattern. We've seen this pattern happen several times in the past. It happened most recently with the school loan program. Federal government took it all over. They started out with the argument that they needed to have another option, a public option for school loans, student loans, so that they could provide a little more honest competition with the free market. What do we get out of George Miller, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and Harry Reid? We get the complete takeover of the student loan program over a little period of time. A great giant leap came down this hallway in a reconciliation package from the Senate, actually threaded right into this Obamacare bill. What's another pattern? There was a time, let's just say, about the time of the Bay of Pigs, the federal government wasn't engaged in flood insurance. All of the property and casualty flood insurance in America was privately provided in the marketplace, because we know what free enterprise does. If there's a demand, somebody will come up with a business idea to supply that demand. And so that was going on at the early part of the 60s until the federal government decided that really they needed to get in and compete with that a little bit. And so they set up the federal flood insurance program. And what did they do? They drove out all of the private sector competition. And today, if you're worried about your house being flooded or your factory being flooded, you have to buy flood insurance from the federal government. And in order for them to compete with the private market, they passed legislation that if there was a real estate loan from a federal bank, they were compelled to buy flood insurance. So they wired in a customer base, and they set the premium rates, and they drove everybody out of the flood insurance industry. And while all that's gone, what do we get out of that? We get a federal flood insurance program that's $19.2 billion in the red, and no private sector competition whatsoever, and no way to judge actually the risk, because the industry hasn't developed. You know what government does? It atrophies. Anybody that doesn't have competition atrophies. They don't develop the technology, they don't develop the new approaches and the innovative ways to market, and they don't streamline, they don't have to find savings. They just raise fees or borrow money from the general fund. Here, that's where the $19.2 billion came from. And then, of course, that's the American people going into debt for $19.2 billion. Why? Because the federal government decided they wanted to go in and provide a little competition so that they could keep the private sector flood insurance industry honest. Because the people that pass that they are not free market personnel. They are anti-capitalists. They are not capitalists. They're not free enterprise people. So we have some of the pattern that's there. The flood insurance pattern, we've got the pattern of the student loan program, and then we have the pattern of the President wanting to step in and drive out the competition in the health insurance industry. The American people have watched that component. They watched the statements about you can keep your health insurance policy. If you like your policy, you can keep it. But the federal government under Obamacare regulates every single health insurance policy. And they'll decide which policies you can keep and which policies are banned by regulations to be written later by a gentleman by the name of Berwick, who believes that we should ration health care and not spend money on the lives of people who may be at the end of their lives. Now, Sarah Palin called that death panels. I think it was, if you have to put something down in a Twitter that explains it all, I think she did that. And we've seen the manifestation of that out of the Obama administration with his appointments, with the actions, with them taking the initiative to want to pay doctors to counsel people to accept death when there's medicine there that may save them or extend their lives. I don't think that's the business of the federal government, to pay people to counsel others to die quicker. That's what turns out of that policy, and I'm glad that they rescinded it, and I'm hopeful that isn't something that creeps back again, but if you've got a Dr. Donald Berwick there, it's going to creep back on us. That's his philosophy. He's there for a reason. But Obamacare cannot be allowed to stay in this code. It must go. It's got to be repealed, and we're about to do that. The first steps and the legislative steps on this took place yesterday with the rules debate upstairs. Hours of debate on the rule, on how this debate would go on. And we debated the rule here on the floor today, and it passed. And the chairman of the Rules Committee, Mr. Dreyer, did an outstanding job of ushering this all through, and has been useful, I think, also in negotiating the types of language that allow for a legitimate debate on the floor of the House. Far more legitimate than the debate that actually crammed Obamacare down the throat of the American people. And so, Mr. Speaker, I come here to celebrate the opportunity to begin taking back a significant measure of American liberty, and that is the repeal of Obamacare. Pulling it out by the roots, lock, stock, and barrel. We must pull it all out, and we can't leave one vestige of it in. This Obamacare, the American people understand. They diagnosed it. They looked at it. They felt it, they ran the tests on it, they began to find out what was in it. Remember Speaker Pelosi saying we have to pass this bill in order to find out what's in it. Well, there's actually some truth in that, because there's no one alive that could have shut themselves up in a room, no matter how brilliant they are, no matter what their experience, there's not one person alive that could have shut themselves up in a room for, I don't care how long they would want, a week, a month, a day, or a year, and read through those 2,500 pages of Obamacare and actually understand each component of it and do an analysis and be able to comprehend the implications of that monstrosity that has now become the albatross around the neck of the President and the Democrat Party in the United States of America. No one could understand it. It is that complicated, but over time we began to see the implications. Republicans predicted many of the implications that were in the bill. We pointed to a lot of the parts of it that were bad. But there wasn't time, and there weren't enough people and enough voices to raise all of the issues that are bad about something of that nature. When you take away people's liberty, that is a big deal, Mr. Speaker. When you take away the right of people to buy a health insurance policy of their choice, no matter what the money they have, no matter what their health, you have to buy a health insurance policy that's approved by Uncle Sam. Now, I kind of like Uncle Sam. I like his image. I like his colors, red, white, and blue. But I don't like the tarnished image that he was given by Obamacare. I don't like the idea of besmirching the memory of Madison and Washington and Franklin and Jefferson. I don't like the idea that these God-given rights that we have, that clearly our founding fathers defined with precision, do come from God, can be besmirched and take away the freedom of a freedom-loving people. But the American people don't like it either. The American people rose up, Mr. Speaker, and so those that argued that they wanted to offer a whole series of amendments on the repeal of Obamacare, they said it's not an open rule, it's not an open process, that they want to come down here and be able to offer amendment after amendment under an open rule, and then they think somehow that by doing so they can perfect a bad piece of legislation. Well, their piece of legislation, even they can only name 4 things that they're willing to defend in 2,500 pages. And of course, they'll demagogue us on every single one of those. The four things that they defend are pre-existing conditions language. Republicans will address pre-existing conditions, not with socialized medicine, but with a practical, constitutional, free market approach, and that's fine. We need to have that debate and advance that kind of policy, and that's been part of our agenda for all along, for several years now. First one. Second one is they claim they closed the donut hole. Well, I thought the donut hole was a bad idea in 2003. It was there because of the constraint in the funding that was available. But they closed the donut hole by increasing fees and taxing others. And low-income people are already exempt from it. So it isn't of significance from a policy standpoint. It is philosophically and politically, and so they make their second argument, donut hole. Third one is they think that it's something that we just couldn't do without. It should take us all down because we're willing to repeal the idea that insurance policies must and may stay on there, shall stay on there until they're 26 years old. Now, I'm astonished by this. I'm astonished that Republicans would think that's a good idea. I can actually name you two of the Republicans that were elected to Congress at age 25. Now, I don't know what kind of pride they would have in their newfound adulthood to walk down the aisle like they did here a couple of days ago to swear into the new 112th Congress, and up until the moment they take the oath of office, they're still on mommy and daddy's health insurance. I mean, that's how bad this idea is, that we would raise kids up and give them keys to the car at age 16 and give them the right to vote and choose the next leader in the free world at age 18 and give them the right to drink at age 21 and keep them on mom and daddy's insurance until they're 26. Why? I wanted my kids to grow up. I announced to them when they were 18 that I'm now legally off the hook, guys. We nurtured you another as long as we can. We're still doing that. We don't have to anymore. I'm so proud of what they've accomplished and what they promised to accomplish. But I wanted my kids to grow up. And that should be our goal when we're raising them. Not to keep them children forever, to keep them on our insurance till they're age 26. To what purpose? Can't they fend for themselves and find a way? And by the way, if insurance companies, if there's a market for this, isn't there going to be a policy out there that you can buy at your own choice that will allow you to keep insurance on until your kids are 26? If there's a market for it, keep them on there until they're eligible for Medicare. It's all right if it's driven by the free market. It's actually constitutional if the states want to impose such a ridiculous mandate, but it's not constitutional, and it's not all right if the federal government imposes such a thing, because it raises the cost of everybody's premium, and it limits our choices, and it taxes people that don't have any kids, people that are on individual policies. So there's three things in Obamacare that they are proud of, and I'm not particularly proud of any of those three. So if I'm willing to vote no on three, actually the fourth one may come to me, and I'll bring it up in a moment, Mr. Speaker. But here's another rub. Obamacare wipes out more than half of the health savings account opportunity that's there. We established health savings accounts in Part D in 2003. A young couple could start in with $5,150 in their health savings account. And let's just say they got married, fell in love, got married, age 20. I can do the math, that's why I use age 20, Mr. Speaker. And they maxed out on their health savings account at $5,150 that first year. It's adjusted for COLA, and so it would go up, that amount would go up each year as they went through their happy married bliss for the next 45 years until they qualified for Medicare. Now, I'd like to see that expanded, but here's how this works. If you look historically back over the last 30 or 40 years, you'll see that that type of an investment like an HSA would accrue at about a 4% compounded interest rate. Not over the last 2 or 3, but over the last 30 or 40, that's a reasonable number to predict. And so your couple that started with an HSA with $5,150 and deposited the max in it every year and spent $2,000 a year out for normal medical expenses would arrive at Medicare eligibility age with about $950,000 in their health savings account. Boy, what a glorious opportunity that is. The federal government's interested in that $950,000 because they want to tax it. They want to tax it as ordinary income when it's taken out of the health savings account. It's not used for health along the way. I suggest this. Why wouldn't we say to that couple, take the money that's in your health savings account, buy a Medicare replacement policy, a paid-up for life Medicare replacement policy, be worth about $72,000 per person at this point. So $144,000 out of the $950,000, and you get, what, $806,000 left over. That's the change. I would say to Americans who had that kind of responsibility and prudence, keep the change. Take yourself off the Medicare entitlement rolls when you're eligible by buying a paid-up replacement policy and an annuitized policy. Keep the change tax-free, travel the world, will it to your kids, do what you want to do. And if we do that, we turn health savings accounts into life management accounts, Mr. Speaker. These kind of accounts that young people would savor the day that they could start their account in their health savings account. And they would nurture it and protect it. And when it build up to the point where it's 20, 30, 40, 50,000, 100,000, they would be in there in this private market that of insurance that we must preserve and protect. Actually, we've got to go back and restore it by repealing Obamacare. They would be in that marketplace saying, I want a $10,000 deductible policy. I want a major medical deductible policy. I can have a higher co-payment policy. I need lower premiums. I have a prospect of good health. I exercise. I watch my diet. I watch my weight. I get regular checkups. And so I'm willing to, and in fact it's be prudent to, have catastrophic policies with high deductibles and potentially a higher co-payment for people who have the funds in their health savings account so that they are protected by insurance for its proper form. Insurance should not be for hangnails. It should not be for the little things. Insurance should be for the things that we can't fund ourselves. That's why it's there. It's protection so that you don't go broke when something catastrophic happens. We would have people not only managing their health, they'd be managing their health insurance premiums. They would be advocating for lower premiums. They'd be saving more money in their health savings account, managing their health for a lifetime while their health savings account transitions into a pension plan. So this is a full lifetime management account. And why can't we do that in the United States of America? These free people that we are, why can't we do that in the United States of America? Well, Obamacare goes in and cuts out more than half of the amount that they can contribute into their health savings account because Obamacare is about, yes, a federal takeover of our health care and the health insurance industry eventually, but it's about also expanding the dependency class in America. It's about causing people to give up on trying and taking care of themselves and just finally sighing and get in the herd with the rest of the sheep and go submit to the government-run health care plan. And when they tell you you can't have a test, then you don't go for a second opinion. You've already been trained to accept the rule of the state. And so they either test you or they don't. They give you treatment or they don't. You can look up to Canada to see the waiting list times for hip replacements, knee replacements. One of those, I believe it's a knee replacement, is 194 days that you wait. The hip replacement then is 300 and some days. For possible it's the other way around. But we're dealing with a half a year or more, almost a year in waiting time. Remember a presentation that was given downstairs in HC9 a year or so ago. A doctor from northern Michigan, Dr. Jansma, as I recall, has written a book on this, but he went up across the border to work within the emergency room in a hospital in Canada. And he'd done a lot of orthopedic surgery, and there was an individual that tore up a leg playing ball, came in, and he looked at it, diagnosed it. He needed to have surgery. He said, I can schedule it for surgery in the morning. We should move on this quickly. Well, the surgery couldn't be scheduled. He didn't know it at the time, but he didn't meet the government regulations. They had to go through and get another bureaucrat to approve it, and then once they had to wait to get it approved, and then they had to wait to schedule the surgery. This young man, in the prime of health, had a job, couldn't do it with his leg torn up. It took 6 months to schedule this young man to go before the specialist to do the secondary diagnosis to approve the need for the surgery so that they could rationalize spending taxpayer dollars to fix his leg. So it's going to be free health care up there, but you don't get it unless the right doctor, the one who's appointed by the state, approves the surgery. So from the day of the time his knee was torn up and they took him into the emergency room, they had to patch him up, put him on crutches, and he had to gimp around for 6 months with a torn up knee to go in and have him look at his knee, the government doctor look at his knee and approve that he needed surgery. Well, then you would think that that surgery might happen, the next day, like it would in America, but it didn't happen until another 6 months. Mr. Speaker, 6 months to wait for government approval for surgery that would have happened the next day in the United States of America with this doctor. Another 6 months just to approve. Then another 6 months to get the schedule to work through to get the knee surgery. And how much rehab does it take to put somebody back in shape after their leg is atrophied for a year and they've drug it around on crutches? So he's out of work for a year and a half. His productivity has been stopped. And additionally, his development professionally has been diminished substantially. This is the kind of thing that happens when government gets involved setting up formulas. It's what the people on that side of the aisle want to do, and that's why the roof caved in, and there was a cataclysmic electoral change that took place on November 2nd, the election where the American people said, enough. Enough to the ruling troika, the Obama, Pelosi, and Reid ruling troika, enough to the liberty-stealing legislation that was coming out of this Congress one after another with cap and trade and government takeover of businesses and the government takeover of the health care industry, including their massive regulation of the health insurance industry. The American people rejected Obamacare. The American people came to this city by the tens of thousands to protest against Obamacare. The American people, for the first time, I believe, in the history of this country, came to this Capitol in such massive numbers that they not only crowded out here on the West Lawn by the tens of thousands, there were so many people, they surrounded the Capitol. They formed a human chain to surround the Capitol and say, keep your hands off of our health care. And it wasn't just a stretched human chain where people were barely hanging on to their fingertips of each other around. They were 6 and 8 deep all the way around the Capitol building saying, keep your hands off our health care. They were shoulder to shoulder, and they were 6 and 8 deep, a full donut. Talk about the donut hole. The Capitol of the United States of America was in the donut hole of the freedom-loving, constitutional, conservative people that came here to reject Obamacare, to petition the government peacefully for redress of grievances. That's what happened. And still their hearts were hardened. Still the regal Speaker Pelosi marched through the throngs with her magnum gavel in her let-them-eat-cake moment, and still they don't get the message. We swore in 87 new freshman Republicans here, 9 freshman Democrats. The majority changes. Every gavel changes hands on the entire Capitol. Amazing. It's amazing that it's so hard for them to hear the message from the American people. Do they still have the level of arrogance? Is it still an intellectual elitism of liberalism? The leftists that think that they have apparently some kind of gift of intelligence that supersedes the common sense and the wisdom of the American people? I reject that. The American people rejected that. And we have 87 new faces over here that I believe are God's gift to America, Mr. Speaker. And I so look forward to the impact. We've already seen the impact. We've seen the impact in the rules package vote. We've seen the impact in the rules vote here today. And we'll see the impact on the repeal of Obamacare on Wednesday after this rule that provides for, I guess I don't think I kept it with me, but this rule that provides for, I believe it's 7 hours of debate. 7 hours. Nancy Pelosi would give us an hour split 30 minutes on each side, no amendments. 7 hours of debate, a debate on the rule, full debate up in the Rules Committee, and we are going to start this process of repealing Obamacare. It's begun with the rules votes here yesterday in the Rules Committee, or this morning maybe, and here on the floor today. We have begun the long, hard slog of the repeal of Obamacare, Mr. Speaker. It is, I believe, a new precedent to see the American people rise up this instantaneously to reject a piece of legislation that was passed. I recall when it was passed here November 7th out of the House, it went back to be worked through the worked through the procedures. I withdrew that shenanigan word and replaced it with the procedures in the United States Senate. But in an unprecedented fashion, they put that legislation together in the Senate, and on Christmas Eve morning, they circumvented the filibuster and they pushed through on a reconciliation package, they called it, a piece of legislation that had to come through to marry up with the House legislation excuse me, in order to, some say in the press, buy the votes to get barely enough to pass Obamacare here in the House. Well, that legislation passed in the Senate on, this was actually their version of Obamacare, passed in the Senate on Christmas Eve morning. Around 9 o'clock is when they opened the vote. They had a chance, procedurally, the Republicans did, to delay that vote until 9 o'clock Christmas Eve. I argued vociferously that they should use every procedural tool at their disposal to delay that vote to the maximum amount, and perhaps something would happen, like, what if a blizzard would have come along and shut this Capitol down, and they wouldn't have been able to put the votes together? That would have been a nice thing, wouldn't it? Look how close that came if you think back upon it. But in any case, when Obamacare passed the Senate, I asked then the question of one of the senior senators over there who opposed Obamacare and did so well. What do we do now? What's our next step? We had 9 more hours we could have fought, or 12 more hours we could have fought. We didn't fight all 12 of those hours. What do we do next? His answer was, well, we pray, and we pray for a victory in the special election in the Senate race in Massachusetts. Well, at that time, a lot of people in America didn't know the name Scott Brown. And I thought that that was a pretty big reach to think we were going to put our stakes in saving America's liberty in a special election U.S. Senate race in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a full, at the time, 100% congressional delegation, all Democrats, the strongest Democrat state in the nation that I know of. So I thought it was a bit of a presumptuous thing to talk about asking the Lord to intervene in Massachusetts, which is the message that I got. But I took a look, and I decided that's our best chance. I ended up going to Massachusetts, and I spent 3 days there. On January 19th, Scott Brown was elected to fill what's commonly known as the Kennedy seat in the United States Senate from Massachusetts. He'd pledged to vote no and kill Obamacare. That made it the veto-proof Republican minority in the Senate. Most people thought on that night that Obamacare was dead. That was January 19th last year. Well, subsequent to that, the President held a health care summit at the Blair House February 25th. That's where he identified his health care plan as Obamacare. And in that health care summit, there were certain selected Republicans that were invited to sit with the Democrats and around this big table, and there were rules. Of course, the rules applied to people differently. The President interrupted Republicans 72 times. Somehow he got his mojo back. Somehow they put together this legal maneuvering to be able to bring legislation here and say they got it. And actually, they got it passed. I'm not taking that issue. The then chair of the Rules Committee wanted to just deem Obamacare passed because they didn't want to take a vote on it. They couldn't get the votes out of their own conference because there were 12 anonymous individuals in a list called the Stupak Dozen that would not vote for a bill that would use federal funding for abortion. So they sat with their coalition. The President of the United States promised to sign an executive order that they seemed to think would amend legislation after it passed the House. And even that wasn't enough. They had to have their reconciliation package out of the Senate that would be married up with and effectively amend some of the Obamacare legislation itself. So, Mr. Speaker, the convolution of all of this, it was a legislative circus of every legislative shenanigan that I can think of to put this together in such a way that they finally got stuff to the President's desk signed in the proper sequence and order so that the attorneys and constitutional scholars could look at that and say, well, actually, there is a piece of legislation that somebody's going to have to follow and the direction of. So we had a presidential executive order that was designed to amend legislation passed by the People's House and the United States Senate that was promised before the legislation was presented to the floor as a condition of its passage here so they could get the votes from the Stupak dozen and others. And there was a reconciliation package from the Senate that amended the legislation. They passed it out of the Senate before the legislation was brought before the House. When do you ever bring legislation that is designed to amend legislation that's not yet passed? You only do that if you don't have the support of the majority of the people in either body. And I will tell you this, Mr. Speaker, on the day Obamacare passed, as a standalone piece of legislation, that big 2,500-page package, if there are no extraneous issues like promises of executive orders from the President or a reconciliation package in the Senate that amends it, if it's Obamacare standalone, 2,500 pages, dropped here in the House of Representatives for an up or down vote, anybody that was here, any student of what was here knows, Mr. Speaker, they did not have the majority votes to pass Obamacare. It was done on the condition that the President would sign an executive order and the Senate reconciliation package would be brought in the form that they demanded it. So we watch all this process and we think, it's making sausage. You don't want to eat the sausage when you watch them. I'm happy to eat the sausage when they make it. I really don't want to eat this one. The American people didn't want to eat this one either. American people rejected it. American people brought their voice and their effort. And I went home that night, the last one to leave this Capitol. And I told myself I will lay down and I'm going to sleep until I'm completely rested up, and I'll wake up fresh in the morning and I'll retool and I'll start a new plan and see what I can do to save America, see what I can do to save what's left of America, because our liberty had been ripped out. Our Constitution had been violated, and I knew the bill was going to be signed eagerly by President Obama, which he did on March 30th. Well, I laid down and slept for about 2.5 hours, and I was the sleep of the exhausted. And I woke up, I sat down at my computer, and I wrote up a request for a bill to repeal Obamacare. That bill draft request went in at the opening of business that following morning. I was waiting for them to unlock the doors. My staff was. And that request turned into a draft within a couple hours. It got back into my hand, 40 words. 40 words. And those 40 words are included in this repeal that is now before this House, that will be debated on Wednesday of next week. I introduced those 40 words into the legislation, and ironically, coincidentally, and perhaps providentially, Michelle Bachmann of Minnesota was doing the same thing at perhaps the same time and put in a bill draft request almost simultaneously, and our bills came down within 3 minutes of each other. Exactly the same 40 words that said the same thing: pull Obamacare out by its roots. That's not the quote, that's the summary, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not going to summarize the bill this time. We don't have 2,500 pages in this repeal, but I would just say a few more words about that. We started then the repeal process within hours of the passage of Obamacare and it being messaged to the President, within hours. And people said, well, that's just throwing a tantrum. You're just frustrated. You've lost. Why can't you just pack up your things and move on? We've got to move on. Put that behind us. That debate's over with. Well, the debate's not over with when a Congress defies the will of the American people. And this Congress, the 111th Congress, the one just passed, defied the will of the American people. And the result was 87 new freshman Republicans, courageous, bold, principled, constitutional conservatives, young, vigorous, with ideology, driven people, statesmen and women in the group that will emerge as national leaders. I believe there's a speaker in that class. I know there are committee chairs in that class. I believe there's a reasonable chance that there's a President of the United States in that class that was elected in 2010. There may be more than one. But we have leaders there. They came to this Congress to repeal Obamacare, and the filing of the repeal of Obamacare in that late March day, that early morning of the late March day, started a process The start of that process began within hours of the passage of Obamacare and well before its actual signed into law. It was introduced before the President actually signed it into law to repeal it. And Michelle Bachmann and I and Connie Mack and let me see, Parker Griffith, they come to mind as people that have introduced legislation to repeal. And we worked that together with many others. There wasn't hesitation. Republicans wanted to sign on to the repeal, and they did so quickly. And over a period of time, the numbers of signatures accumulated to about 86. And if 86 are ready to sign for repeal, then we decided, let's turn this into a discharge petition. Nancy Pelosi won't let this come forward until it does. So we did that, and I filed a discharge petition here on the floor, Mr. Speaker, and members began to go down and sign the discharge petition. And the numbers of signatures went up in the discharge petition when they said it was impossible to repeal Obamacare, all the way up to 173. And it became bipartisan with the signature of Gene Taylor, whom I believe would have been reelected to this Congress had he not voted for Nancy Pelosi. He did lose his election, and he served well here in this Congress. But the result of this is that the existence of the bill to repeal Obamacare in the last Congress was inspiring to new candidates that ran for office. It was inspiring to their supporters. It was inspiring to their constituents and their voters. And the discharge petition with 173 signatures said, Republicans have the resolve to repeal Obamacare. Republicans have the resolve. And so the inspiration and the resolve, along with a fairly long list of anti-free market, anti-freedom things that took place out of the Pelosi Congress and the Obama administration, all contributed to give us the inertia to get this point to where we are today. But the legislation that I introduced then actually amended at the end of the last Congress because it needed to consider the reconciliation package that came from the Senate after the bill was passed. It wasn't possible for me to introduce legislation to repeal that because it hadn't passed. So packaged it up together and put that in as a squared away, on point, full 100% repeal of Obamacare legislation that I introduced, again with Michelle Bachmann, on the last day of the last Congress and on the first day of this Congress. And that's the legislation, that's the language that is considered before this Congress and will be voted on Wednesday of next week and will result in the House repealing Obamacare, Mr. Speaker. And so it's a 2,500-page bill. I wouldn't presume to come to the floor and read a 2,500-page bill, Mr. Speaker, but I would do this. I think it's a delightful experience to read a bill that's short and to the point. And this is H.R. 2. H.R. 2, the repeal of Obamacare. And I'm going to just read this into the record, Mr. Speaker, aside from the titles, just down to the meat of the bill. And it won't take very long. It's actually altogether now 131 words, but it reads this way. Effective as of the enactment of Public Law 111-148, such act is repealed, and the provisions of law amended or repealed by such act are restored or revived as if such act had not been enacted. Well, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Now, that's just the first part. And it repealed, effective as of the enactment of the law, Obamacare, such act is repealed and the provisions of law amended or repealed by such act are restored or revived as if such act had not been enacted. It doesn't take a lot of complicated language to say, pull it all out by the roots as if it had never been there. That's what we get with the repeal that's before us now that will be debated and voted on Wednesday and next week. This is the language that I introduced long back when people said it's just a frustrating political exercise. You will never repeal Obamacare. You can't get a vote on Obamacare, so why are you going through the motions? It's just a legislative tantrum. No, it's not. It's tangible. It's not a tantrum. It's tangible. It's here. It's here before us now. Here's a second component of it. This is a reconciliation package that couldn't be addressed on the day it passed, but can now. It says this. Effective as of the enactment of the Health Care and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010, the Senate Reconciliation Act, Public Law 111-152, Title I and Subtitle B of Title II of such act are repealed, and the provisions of law amended or repealed by such title or subtitle, respectively, are restored or revived as if such title and subtitle had not been enacted. Once again, the repetition of that language for the two major components of Obamacare now. They are repealed and the provisions of law amended or restored by such title or subtitle, respectively, are restored or revived as if such title or subtitle had not been enacted. Well, isn't that refreshing, Mr. Speaker, that we have a piece of legislation here that's not 2,500 pages, it's not so long and complicated that we can't read it here on the floor. It's not so complicated that anybody that might be happen to sitting in the gallery or watching on C-SPAN or might be reading through the congressional record can understand what's going on here. This is in the full light of day with the support of the American people. 60% of the American people, according to a Rasmussen poll here some time back, support the repeal of Obamacare, as do I. And, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the debate on Wednesday. I look forward to the vote going up on the board on Wednesday. I look forward to the beginning. But as the beginning of the repeal of Obamacare, and then the press asked me a question on that earlier today, is this, if you pass the repeal of Obamacare, we will pass the repeal of Obamacare. Was that the end? No. Reflect back on Winston Churchill, it's not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end of Obamacare, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning of the end of Obamacare. That's what I believe is coming. I heard the gentleman from Texas bring up some Churchill when he said sweat, blood, and tears. There are some people out there that bring some quotes to mind that stand out for me, and one of them is the Congressman from Indiana, Mike Pence. His statement on our persistence and due diligence in bringing about the repeal of Obamacare is this. And I wrote it down because it impressed me, not the words but the manner in which he says it. They're always superior to my delivery, but it is this, Mr. Speaker. Congressman Pence of Indiana said, if House Republicans got the message from the American people last November, we won't just vote once to repeal Obamacare. We'll vote to repeal Obamacare again and again until we consign their government takeover of health care to the ash heap of history where it belongs. Close quote. Nice quote, Mike Pence. It sounds like Ronald Reagan to me. Consign, and we will vote again and again until we consign their government takeover of health care to the ash heap of history where it belongs. I intend to stay with this with an even heightened level of persistence, Mr. Speaker, to bring about the final and complete repeal of Obamacare. Mr. Speaker, to be able to one day watch as the President of the United States, the next president probably, puts an end to Obamacare. It will take persistence on our part. It'll take determination. We'll pass this out of the House. We can pass it again and again. Send it over to the Senate, where Harry Reid gets a hot potato on his lap that gets hotter and bigger each time. We have appropriations bills coming through here. We've got a CR that ends March 4th. And everything that funds our government, we should put into that language that prohibits any of the dollars from being used to implement or enforce Obamacare. We can shut off all of the implementation of Obamacare. This House, if this House stands resolute and determined, there's not a dime that can be spent by the federal government without our approval. So we can shut off the funding that implements or enforces Obamacare, and we must. And we must stick with it. We must stick with it with the determination that comes from people like Mike Pence, with the tone that comes from Ronald Reagan, that comes from his mouth, and I think the determination that comes from Winston Churchill. We will fight on this. We will fight to the end of this. We have a majority to start with now in the House. We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength, whatever the cost may be. We shall never surrender. We'll carry on this struggle until, in God's good time, with all His power and might, He steps forth to the rescue and liberation of our God-given American liberty That's what will happen in this Congress. The day will come, Mr. Speaker, that the next President of the United States, I pray, stands on the west portico of the Capitol here in this building, down that hallway and off to the left, to take the oath of office. And when the Chief Justice steps forward and he takes his oath on the Bible, I want to see that next President of the United States take that oath with pen in hand, Mr. Speaker. And I want him to take the oath, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, so help me God. And before he even shakes the hand of the Chief Justice to be congratulated as the next President of the United States, I want that pen in that hand to come down on the podium and sign into law the final repeal of Obamacare as the first act of office of the next President of the United States. And I'll support the man or woman that's willing to do that. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate your attention, the honor to address you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.